I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the all-new Volkswagen T-Cross, a new small SUV from this German manufacturer that arrives in a congested segment to take on cars like the Mazda CX-3, the Hyundai Kona, and the Toyota CHR. And it really sort of transcends the segment because while the T-Cross has a pretty small footprint, it actually has a considerable amount more interior and cargo space than many of its rivals. So it kind of offers you that really smart packaging that we've come to know and love from Volkswagen without having to go to a big SUV. Now, the T-Cross has been out in Europe and some other markets for over a year now, so it's been quite a long wait for Australians, but it's now here in two grades, offering you a fair amount of choice, but both sharing the same turbocharged 3-cylinder engine that we'll check out along with this car's driving dynamics when we take it out onto the road. But first of all, in today's review, we're going to be doing our usual thing, checking out the interior, how much cargo space and practicality there is before we head out onto the road and see what the new T-Cross 85 TSI is like to drive. Now, this one that you see here is the top spec style grade with the R-Line package, which is why it looks so convincing outside. The turquoise paint is available across the range, but stuff like those really tidy looking 18-inch wheels and other slightly more athletic accents are exclusive to this R-Line that I think is going to be quite popular. Now, the T-Cross arrives a couple of months ahead of a slightly larger new VW SUV called the T-Roc, but actually this car offers you a slightly newer version of Volkswagen's interior and a little bit more practicality, so I think that this is going to be where the bulk of sales are at. Now, let's talk a little bit about this interior, which is actually a very nice place to spend time in the main, but there are a few caveats to that point. Now, what we get here is the latest version of Volkswagen's interior design, except for the new Golf Mark 8 with its floating screen, but broadly it looks like a Polo in here, which is no surprise because it's largely based on the Polo. So we have two really nice digital screens here ahead of us. We have an 8-inch unit with satellite navigation if you go for the optional sound and vision pack, but you do have to option in factory nav. You also get digital gauges with that package, a crisp high resolution active info display, and you get Beats audio as well that sounds really convincing. So it's worth kind of looking at the options to see if you can bring the T-Cross up to that really high standard of interior technology. But the basics are good. We have a creamy leather steering wheel, shifter, and comfortable seats even on the base model. This R-Line does get slightly upgraded pews with some Alcantara. They feel quite grippy and supportive with lumbar adjustment, and you know, it's a quite comfortable place to spend a couple of hours. In terms of problems though, there's a big one in that basically the entire dash and doors are all scratchy plastics. Now, in this segment, you'd expect hard doors, but given the Volkswagen Polo has soft material here and here, it's just a bit of a shock and feels a little bit mean. Thankfully, the T-Cross earns some of those points back with practicality because we have an adjustable armrest, unlike the Polo, some storage space underneath that, big cup holders, wireless phone charging with a little groove now to stop your phone from sliding off it, thank goodness, and also a rubberized box up here on the dash, which is smart in the winter, but will probably cause your stored items to heat up a lot in summer. So up front, I think it's pretty good. What about in the back? Here in the back, the T-Cross offers you a really good amount of space, much more than a car like the Mazda CX-3. And that's what I mean by the fact it sort of transcends these class segments because it offers you like TARDIS-like space in the cabin. So for myself, at 6 foot, I have another couple of inches of headroom, legroom is really good, and toe room is unlimited behind my own driving position. So I've got as much space back here as I would have in, say, a Mazda CX-5, which is a much bigger car. In terms of other amenities, it's patchy. So we have 2 fast charging USB ports in the back, bringing the total for the car to 4. We have this odd little storage space here, so no air vents. Like, you'd basically give it a pass because obviously as the smallest Volkswagen SUV, this probably isn't realistically going to be a family car. But with this much space, it could be, so air vents would have been nice. Of course, those doors continue to be hard back here. Even the armrest is hard, which I think sucks. and we don't have a fold down armrest, which is a bit of a shame. But you know, basically the comfort and amount of space on offer back here is actually really good. The other thing is that in sort of a feature taken from larger SUVs, you can slide this whole bench, so you can give your passengers a lot less legroom, but significantly increase the amount of boot space. And we'll take a look at what that means now, heading around the back. One feature I really like about the T-Cross is this rather 1980s reflector strip that runs across the whole length of the boot, and also this spaced out model badging is something I like, but I know there's different opinions on that, so you can let me know below the video. Opening up the manual tailgate, there's a decent amount of boot space, 385 litres if those back seats are pushed all the way back. But just like I showed you, you can push that bench forward and that expands that space considerably. Otherwise, it's a smart boot, no load lip, unlike many cars in this segment, so you can actually just drive your bags straight in and out of that boot space. There's actually a bit of underfloor storage, even though there is a spare wheel under there, which is good, and another thing which isn't to be taken for granted in this segment. And as for the manual door, it's not too high or too heavy to use. So the practicality of this car, I reckon, gets an A. What about the driving dynamics? Let's jump in and find out. So what's the new T-Cross like to drive here on Australian roads? Well, the good news is that this is a really solid, small SUV, and I think it's a really good addition to the market because a number of the cars in this space are either getting on in years, like the Mazda CX-3, or they're pretty small and basic, like the Hyundai Venue. So if you've been waiting for, you know, a reasonably affordable, really little crossover, but you've been waiting for something with the sort of maturity and slightly upmarket tinge from a European manufacturer, then this is probably going to be a car that you're interested in. So it's a good thing then that the T-Cross is actually pretty impressive from here behind the wheel. But first things first, let's talk about the engines that are going to be offered with this car. There's only one at launch, and it's familiar if you know anything about the new Volkswagen Polo. It's an 85 kilowatt turbocharged 3-cylinder engine, 85 kilowatts of power and 200 newton meters of torque, just from a 1 litre unit, so pretty torquey in terms of the displacement. And we've come to know this engine a little bit here on the channel. We've driven it in a couple of Polos, but of course the T-Cross is a little bit bigger. It's about 6 centimeters longer, it's substantially taller, and it's just a touch wider and a little bit heavier. So, you know, the engine is having to do a little bit more work, and it goes to the front wheels through a 7-speed dry clutch DSG transmission. But while the engine certainly looks a little modest on paper in terms of its outputs, it actually really punches above its weight. And of course, that's a Volkswagen Group trait. These people have been making small displacement turbocharged petrol engines for ages that feel more muscular than you would initially suggest, and that is definitely the case here in the T-Cross. The engine feels torquey, punchy enough. There is a bit of hesitation off the line engaging first gear with the DSG, but you kind of learn to drive around it. And once you're on the move, you can easily sort of put the foot down. There is a bit of vibiness from that turbo triple, but I actually think it's characterful and good to listen to, but you'll know whether you like it after you take a test drive in this car. And all in all, it certainly feels nippy enough both around town and on country roads. Of course, you do need to plan your overtaking a little bit more, but that's going to be the case with any car in this segment. Now, if you do want a bigger engine, later on the T-Cross is going to be offered with the Volkswagen Group's 1.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder, basically the Golf engine, making 110 kilowatts of power and 250 newton meters of torque, and I reckon it'll be a real goer with that engine. I wouldn't bother waiting for it. I reckon the 85 TSI is good enough, but it will be an option. There's also going to be the new T-Roc, which will have 140 kilowatts of power, so that will be definitely the faster choice. So engine and gearbox wise, I think there's a good situation here in the T-Cross. What about the ride and handling? Well, it does differ a little bit on specifications. So the car I'm driving here is the R-Line. It's on the bigger 18-inch wheels, and usually you would expect that to involve a degradation of the ride, but it's actually an unusual situation. The base model, which we've also had on test this week, rides on 16-inch wheels, but the compliance isn't actually as good. So I've been trying to figure this out the whole week through, and I think it must come down to a slight change in the damping for the R-Line, but it basically just has a little bit better body control, and it actually absorbs bumps really well despite having the bigger wheels. So it's one of those rare cases where you can actually go for the style points of the larger, cooler looking alloys without having to worry about the ride suffering, because it actually, I think, has a slightly better ride, which is weird, I know. It's, you know, it's not a sports car, it's not a sports SUV by any extent of the imagination, but it is, you know, it's fun to wind out that engine and to give it a little bit of a punt down a country road. But for most people, this is going to be an errand car, and it gets that job done very well. There's very good visibility. The mirrors are actually quite large for a small SUV, and the glass house is really big. Like, this is quite a squared off, chunky looking little car, and that brings some benefits with it, both in terms of the packaging and in terms of the visibility. Then stuff like the steering is quick and light, and I think it works well for this kind of car. It also aids in that sense of maneuverability. I like the perforated steering wheel here in the R-Line, gives it a slightly luxe kind of feel from behind the wheel. The seat's comfy, and it's also pretty safe. We have high-speed autonomous emergency braking standard on every variant. Lane keep assist is also standard on every variant, which is really great. And there's also a whole host of active safety features on the upper spec style variant, which is what the R-Line is based on. So you get blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, and adaptive cruise control as well. There's no 360-degree camera, there is a standard reversing camera, but this car is really small and easy to park anyway. So those are our detailed opinions on the new Volkswagen T-Cross. This is a really good addition to the small SUV landscape, bringing those sort of mature and refined driving dynamics that we're used to from small Volkswagens to this fun little category. Yep, there are definitely some low rent materials in that interior that I wish I could fix. And of course, there's a question of value compared to the underlying Volkswagen Polo. This SUV is a lot more expensive, just like all small SUVs are more expensive than their hatchback counterparts. So there's a question of what you really need and what you really want. But if you decide to go for one of these city-sized crossovers, this one's a good one. Now let me know what you think about the T-Cross down below this video. Hit subscribe while you're down there. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.